Welcome, I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher, from our BizVision studios in the UK. You're watching the BBTV network. So, what does a customer mean to you? Quite simply, at a very basic level, it means I get to feed my family and pay my bills. And if ever I lose that focus, I'm doomed, in my mind. So, if it's that simple, why are so many customers constantly on the move? Because they're disappointed with customer service or their experience with a supplier. My guest today has some terrific answers that will make you think about the whole customer experience that you deliver, or don't. In this new and very competitive world, you can't afford any slippage in customer or client relationships. Your reputation can be quickly ruined if you do so, especially with the ever-present social media watching you. You need to wise up to knowing how to achieve longer lasting relationships. My guest is a returning guest because I know you can learn so much from him and his excellent book, this one, Connecting with Clients. So let's say welcome back, Paul Cowan. Hello, Paul.
Hello, welcome, and good to be back. Thank you for inviting me today.
Well, it's only because you just want to get it one over on me about that you're still in the beautiful Isle of Wight and it's cold up the Northumberland and you. But just for our viewers and listeners who may not know, tell them where the Isle of Wight is, please.
Well, for those of you who are not familiar with the UK, the Isle of Wight is a very small island and it lies off the south coast of England. And we refer to the mainland or the bigger part of the United Kingdom as the North Island. And we are very firmly the South Island. And it's very good to be here. It's a small island and it has a very nice holiday feel to it, except in this office, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do envy you. It is a beautiful part of the world. I'm talking to Paul in three parts of clarity, communicate, and construct. In part one, I'll ask him to expand on his advice in his book regarding the need for clarity and to ensure that you are listening and hearing. In part two, we'll chat about the importance of communicating with your clients, especially in the virtual world. And in part three, construct, we'll talk about building relationships and his working alliance approach. But first, Paul, what's your opinion on customer or client relationships today? Do you think they've suffered in the pandemic or gained? And in so, what key areas, suffering or gain?
Well, I think it's really interesting. If we think about client relationships or customer relationships, any type of customer relationships, there are only two problems in every relationship. There's problem A, the task at hand, which is up here. And then there's problem B, which is the relationship. How are we getting on together? My experience of you as a customer is not just about here, because I expect you to deliver the stuff that you're going to deliver, but it's down here. How are you managing my expectations? Are you really listening to me? Are you really caring about what I say? Are you responding effectively? And this book is about problem B. And if we think about during the pandemic, it's been way more difficult for people to communicate. Let's face it, we can't go out, we can't walk across the street or drive and see our clients. And most of us have gone online. And that raises a whole series of issues, which I can come on to later on.
Yeah.
But Malcolm, you raised the topic with me. You talked, you mentioned effective listening. And of course, that is the start point for any effective client relationship. Getting, effective listening is actually about aligning on a very clear direction of where we're going together, whatever your service, whether in garden landscaping or advertising or anything. What is that direction? If you set off accurately, then it's likely you're going to get to your destination quite close to where it's supposed to be. But if you get it wrong to start with, you're going to end up a long way away. Most of us think that we're very good at listening. However, that is not true. I found out when I learned to become or studied to become a psychotherapist that actually I was as poor as the average man in the street. And there are a couple of things that get in the way. Firstly, we're overconfident about listening. We all think we can do it.
Yeah.
The next thing is hearing is not the same as listening. It really isn't.
Mm.
The other thing is, as I speak, the fastest I can speak is 125 words a minute. Your mind is going at 400 to 600 words a minute. That's plenty of time for you to go on holiday somewhere and come back. And of course, in the meantime, you've missed some critical words that I've been saying.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
also hard work. It's really hard work. And then, of course, Malcolm, we're probably of a similar age group. We think we've learned about listening. Actually, our grandchildren are way better. And in fact, listening is at a peak at around 5 or 6, and their kids are like sponges. They just take in everything. By the time they get to uni, I'm afraid it's really got off. And then, of course, our memory. We think it's great. Fact is, if you listen to this few minutes and then try and reprise what I've just said, you'll get about half of it probably right. Within 48 hours, another half will have gone. So there are huge, huge challenges to listening.
Yeah, I love that point that you just made about the children. Next week, my eldest grandchild is 7 years old. So Elizabeth is 6 at the moment. And you're so right. She sponges, she listens to you, and she's asking you the next question before she's thinking ahead, asking the next question. And I'm sort of amazed how they watch the news, they absorb things and everything like that, and it's there exactly as you say. And then if I talk to either of my daughters who are in their 30s, it's gone. Paul, let's move on to the first of my 3 C's: clarity. The word appears on a regular basis in your book. Do you think clarity is something that's all too often glossed over? And if so, why? And it seems to me also that too many people are listening but not hearing, as we've just been discussing, to their customers. And that also causes a lack of clarity. So what can be done about it?
Well, I think that, it is particularly difficult right now. Let's just admit that in today's world of communication that we live in, it is really challenging. And clarity is fundamentally important. That starting of the journey. Now, I think recognizing that communication is complex. It is not as easy as just what goes into our ears. If we think about communication for a moment, what's going on between us as we speak, there are a whole host of channels that are operating. And I think that, it's good to remember that only 7% of effective communication are the words themselves, just 7%.
Yeah.
And that is so important. 38% tone of voice, intonation, speed of delivery, accent on a particular part of a word or sentence, and then 55% body language. You might think, well, you can see my arms moving, and therefore you're getting a really good scope of what I'm talking about. And I'm emphasizing scope as though I'm broadening it. That's how we use body language. And the problem is that often we can focus just too much on the words, and words are very slippery and they're ambiguous. Unless we have those other elements within the mix, actually, we're going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
One of the things that, if I say something to somebody, or my wife, for example, if I just use the words, nice hair, after she's been to the hairdresser, there are many different expressions that I can deliver. From, you must be mad, woman. How on earth did you choose that?
Paul,
wow, you look fantastic.
I'm running alongside you here. If I say that to Kim, she said, so what was wrong with it beforehand?
Exactly.
I love that, yes.
So, carry on. And I think, we're talking about what's happening today, and then we're relying on virtual presence, which is in effect a Zoom or Skype or Teams or Blue Jeans or whatever. And of course, we miss the micro expressions on our face. Normally, if we're sitting next to each other, you'd be able to judge little nuances, because that's how we have learned as a community of human beings to communicate. Micro expressions. We'd also be able to pick up the intonation. Now, we can't see the micro expressions. The buffering on this system, however fantastic, is still going to be degrading the audio. And it's really interesting. Recent research is saying that unconsciously we speak 15% more loudly on a virtual presence platform than we do face to face. So it's harder work. We get tireder. We begin to miss things.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things that are really getting in the way of us really effectively communicating effectively, let alone the listening, skills that I just mentioned earlier on. So there are a further set of problems. It's not to say that they can't, be overcome, but inevitably our understanding of another human being is going to be a bit sketchier. We're going to need to work a lot harder to clarify. We're going to have to be more curious, a bit like your granddaughter. We're going to have to really ask questions. We're going to have to really want to get under the skin of what our clients and our customers really want. What's behind their questions or their requests? And actually, in terms of keeping the workload for them and for us, we need shorter meetings and we need breaks. And if we're with teams of other people in a presentation, we need lots of practice. We need to get it really smooth. We need to keep it short. So there are things we can do, but even so, we're human beings. We are actually, born and bred to communicate with other face to face.
There's some brilliant examples of in your book, by the way. I love that one where you had to take a breather outside an ad agency one day because you've been back-to-back meetings, and you heard the clients coming out muttering away between them and wonder what, it was all negative comment. You went in and the agency's presentation team came in and said how wonderful they'd done. So it was a complete
it's complete two different worlds. Different worlds. And I think thank you for reminding me of that, because human beings are optimists, so we have this wonderful feeling about ourselves and about others generally. So we walk out of a meeting thinking the most positive. We go into the meeting thinking the most positive, but that stops us often from being curious about what's going on and why it's going on. And curiosity is a great drive. If we can just stimulate, our mental process to be listening deeply, to pause. That's another thing, Malcolm, just pausing, creating silence, allowing our minds to still ourselves. And then we can really begin to open to the world of another person.
Yeah, I think in some cases we're frightened to pause when we're online like this, because in case the other person thinks that we've frozen, I've gone offline. But I totally see what you're saying, Paul, because, for umpteen years, as you can see from the grey hairs, I've presented all around the world events, and I'm used to presenting and bringing in an audience and managing that person who's sitting quiet over there, bringing them in. But you can't do that so easily within a Zoom type of environment, can you?
No, it is much more challenging. And yet silence, if we give our customers, we give our clients the opportunity of silence and we ask them a question, then the silence really helps them engage. And we ask them an open question, not a closed question. That really allows them to bring their inner world, their requests, their issues, their problems, the opportunities, the ideas to us. And boy, if somebody brings an idea to me about what they really want, now I know how I'm going to satisfy that request. Otherwise, I'm just full of my stuff. And that really doesn't help. It just means I'm going to be pushing my stuff onto them. And that really is not an effective way of making connection with clients.
Paul, before we move to part 2, I'd just like to remind viewers and listeners of your website URL. And this is such an easy one. I love this one. It's paulcowan.com. paulcowan.com. I'll spell that out for listeners. Viewers, obviously, you can see it on the screen behind me. But listeners, Paul, I reckon you can do that, Paul, and Cowan is Cowan, paulcowan.com. And Paul's book is called, and you can see it in my hand here, Connecting with Clients for Stronger, More Rewarding and Longer Lasting Client Relationships, and it's published by Harriman House. I love the bit on the front of the book. Perhaps you can see on the screen behind me where it says, do you have the confidence not to buy this book? That's excellent. I like that. Now, I like the book because it allows me to dip in, read, and reflect. And I said to Paul, though, beforehand, that I was taking it off my bedside table and putting it into my desert island suitcase whenever I get to the desert island, but it'll be there with me. Paul, time for part two. And my second C, which is, we started on it in the last C, it's communication. Now, again, it's a word that appears regularly in your book. Where are the mistakes or miscommunication made? And what's the why and the how of the importance of communicating with your clients, especially in the virtual world?
Well, I want to start by saying that in the virtual world, we generally, or many of us, seem to be relying more on email than we ever have in the past. It seems that many of our customers and clients are less accessible to us, either sitting on calls or trying to service clients. And email in itself raises a number of really challenging issues. Of course, we touched on it a bit earlier, but when I read an email, just those bold words, those few percentage points of communication, I'm left in an emotional void. I don't know how important they are or what emotional context they come across in. What did the sender really mean? How attached were they? I have no idea whether the sender is suppressing a desire or expressing something really powerfully. So I am left to make it up myself. My business partner is a very factual chap, and he uses email to communicate in an everyday way. And the problem with that is that if I'm not very careful, I can read his emails, which are factually correct, as criticism or underminingness or challenge, when he often has no such intention. It's just that he pares his communication down to the very, very thinnest amount. So, I caught myself writing a very long email to one of my team not so long ago. And, I kept rereading it. And in the end, I sent it off to somebody else to read because it was a fairly tough email in many respects. And, I got my own advice back in the end, which was, why don't you just pick up the phone? Because this is going to go wrong, And actually, I think that's a really good thing, to be picked up in that way, to just, if you've got a concern about it, don't send it. Pick up the phone. So email represents a danger because it doesn't effectively help us to communicate with the other person. Now, it's fine for factual records. I've written off for an estimate today, and it's really simple. It's very factual. And I will get back a factual response. That is fine. But if we're talking about customer experience and building relationships, email, other than those factual confirmations, is just not it. Way better to pick up the phone. Better to do this. And in a few weeks' time, ideally in the UK and increasingly elsewhere in the globe, to be able to go visit our customers again or see them face to face. And that is going to really begin to liberate us. But the habit of using email really is not that helpful. I don't know about you, Malcolm, whether you find that true as well.
Yeah, I totally with you. I'm a sensitive person, Paul, just like anybody. And we get a little bit more sensitive as we get slightly older as well, I feel. And some of the responses you get from people are in text speak or whatever it may be. And you think, oh, what was that? I thought that was a good conversation. Myself, I try not to do that. I try to write my emails as though I'm talking to somebody. I know I'd never get a job in a lawyer's because I was once advising a law firm on bidding for a big contract, and they couldn't understand why they had to understand the buyer language rather than their language. It really is a big you're so spot on that one. And as I say, text, I just think that we're not understanding other people's feelings enough. And I just want to pick you up on something you've just said there. As we're getting back to seeing customers, my sort of research from buyers and people like that is that they don't want to see the buyers, the salespeople again. They're being far more productive. They're wanting to hybrid work. Some work home, sometimes in the office. They're going into the office only to meet their colleagues. So this new world that we've been taught about communication is going to be with us, isn't it?
It is, and I think that's a really good challenge. Over time, we'll find out how this is going to settle down. But already we can see in markets like Australia that face-to-face contact is on the rise. It is already as we speak, and this is May 2021. We can see that people are walking in and out of businesses on a regular basis. Staff do want to go back to the office, but yes, they do want to have the opportunity of working from home. So I think for clients and their suppliers or their agencies, then finding a regular rhythm where we have the opportunity to reconnect face-to-face is what is going to be most important. Yeah. And I think that there will be a balance. No, it probably won't go back to how it was immediately, and it may never do. And certainly I know our travel budget in the business has been slashed and will stay down for a good couple of years. Yeah. Nevertheless, that will enable us to be at least in front of our key clients on a regular but not so frequent basis. And so pre-planning, having a relationship strategy that says, and this is how we're going to be operating in the next 3-6 months period, and revising it, I think is really important to develop those customer relationships, and not simply to be complacent and say, well, okay, so we're working online, boom, that's it. That won't cut the mustard. We will lose our competitive advantage, all of us, if we just say, this is the new normal.
And what I really like about your book, sorry for going on about your book, by the way, Paul,
I'm very happy.
I very apologize, is that you're making us think beyond the technology, and cultural agility. All these things are much more important than the technology to get a grasp of, and it's a lot of it's really there in that book. Now let's go to my final C in part 3, and that's construction. Building a long-term relationship with clients or customers. How to do it? Can we start with you telling us about your working alliance approach?
Well, yes, I think the working alliance approach, which is what I learned as a psychotherapist, is primarily for psychotherapists a way of establishing the degree to which we are aligned in this venture and whether or not we are working successfully together. And building a working alliance is a very important issue for psychotherapists, in that it's a very good predictor of positive outcome. So it is really, really important. And there are 3 real parts about any working alliance. And this, by the way, is applicable in every business, and certainly in every professional services business. The first is about clarity of the client, in particular, clarity and agreement around the client goals. What is it that the client actually wants? Being really crisp and clear about that. And the initial process can be about helping the client to be clear and crisp about that. And really then, having got clarity, to have an agreement that locks both parties together. Yes, that is our joint endeavour. And we can refer back to that as we go along the process, whether that's a short process with a therapy client, or a long process with a therapy client, or indeed any client. So that clarity around, that fundamental start point, that's the bit about which I mentioned right earlier on, about the accuracy of where we're starting and where we're going. The second thing is, and this is about problem A and problem B, is, does the client have basic trust? And the client in a psychotherapeutic environment is that the trust that I, as a psychotherapist, am being helpful and constructive. So that's, does the client really trust that? By the way,
That's really, trust is so important today, more than ever, I think, because people are so suspicious. You know, you're suspicious of the email you get, you're suspicious of the text you get, you're suspicious of the phone call you get, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and you know that's why the face-to-face and the personal interaction is so important. So that and you know, and trust is about, for me, is about two individuals rather than organizations. I can have confidence in an organization, but I can trust an individual, and that takes time to build up. But it's a two-way thing. So does the client actually? Do I trust the client to bring himself or herself fully to this endeavor? And is the client in a psychotherapeutic role committed to stay engaged even when things get tough, or in a commercial sense, when things go wrong? And things will always go wrong. There will always be challenges. There is no question about it. Things will never go as smoothly as we hope for in commercial operations. So does the client have a basic trust that I'm being helpful and supportive, and will they stay engaged in the process? And the third part is, really, are they really committed to you know, the whole process? You know, are they there with me, and am I with them?
I just sold out that there bit, by the way, Paul. It's not just a physical presence, is it? It's a spiritual presence, should we say, or a cultural presence even.
I think for me, it's about, exactly. It's about, are we in lockstep together?
Yes,
and you know, and that is the important thing. Now, if the client is not in lockstep together, then the question will be, well, do they trust my interventions? And probably they won't. If we're not in lockstep together, they might start bringing in different issues. So in the commercial world, they might start changing the brief, or they might say, well, that's not quite good enough, or whatever it is, or they might not show up for meetings, just as therapy clients don't show up. So are we in lockstep? So I think, you know, those three parts, getting clarity and agreement, so that there's absolute lock solid at the beginning. Are we developing a real trust of working together, so that not only will they accept my point of view and I accept their point of view fully, but when things go wrong, we're together. And then are we in lockstep, so that you know, we're absolutely side by side on this journey together.
You know that this checking of lockstep, I think it's so important. Though I love the whole three steps there, Paul, and I'm reflecting as I'm listening to you of the many meetings I've had and the many mistakes I've made. But how do we actually check with the client that we're all together, that we're going on the same direction, or same hymn book, or whatever it may be? Is there a secret word, a secret phrase?
I don't think there's a secret phrase, but I would say being curious and being curious and stepping above the relationship and looking down and just noticing what's going on all the time, and investing, I think, for me, in the beginning of the relationship is fundamentally important, so that we can agree those steps about clarity and agreement, build that trust, or that strength of relationship, and then I have a visceral feeling if we're in lockstep or not. I really do experience that. And if we're not, then actually raising the issue with the client. Making it, rather than just leaving it, surfacing the issue, so that it becomes something between us that we can discuss. It's not just my problem, it's now both of our problems. That, to me, is really, really important.
I think if you start off showing genuine interest in the client from the very beginning, rather than being there to sell the client something, then that probably gets the relationship off to a better start than anything. Do you think?
Well,
same?
I would totally agree. You know, I say that I've never sold anything, you know, but I've asked lots of clients lots of questions, and they've given me some fascinating answers. And most of the time I say, well, this might be of interest to you. It might not be, in which case we can discuss where you might get the thing you really want. And that is most important. I think that allows clients to relax. If we try and sell anything, if anybody tries to sell anything to me, I sort of muscle up somewhere. But if somebody asks me questions and is really curious about what's going on for me, I think, oh, well, we have the beginning of a working alliance. We're on the same page here.
Yeah.
This guy is really, or this woman is really listening to me, and they really want to know. So that, if they've got something that's appropriate, they can say, here it is. You want it. And I think that's great. Gives me choice. Interestingly, since leaving a profession that in which selling was key, advertising, selling is key, or thought to be key, I found not selling to be the most effective thing I've ever done.
It's client results that count, isn't it?
It is.
But sadly, I've got to leave the Isle of Wight. Sometimes when meeting a guest for a second time, you can learn more than double you did in the first interview. That's certainly been the case with Paul Cowan, author of this book, Connecting with Clients. Paul, thanks once again.
Malcolm, thank you very much for the invitation. Good to see you.